the trauma of the partition meant that we in our heads got more focused on our land borders rather than our maritime links that historically existed and connected India and the Gulf on one side, India and the ASEAN on the other side. And it's only now that those old links are being revived as part of our Look West, Act West policy, whatever. And you can see that it means a lot to these countries because India resides in the collective consciousness in these countries as very few other countries do.
Welcome to The Gist. I'm Surya Gangadharan. My guest on this chat is Navdeep Suri, a former ambassador to the UAE and to Egypt, and he tracks developments in the Gulf closely. Ambassador Navdeep, welcome. Good to see you again after a fairish gap. We've had we were talking earlier, and you mentioned that Kuwait and Qatar have been two of the outliers in India's diplomacy in the Gulf. Would you explain?
Well, I guess what I was trying to say was that, soon after coming into power in 2014, Prime Minister Modi did this very conscious outreach to West Asia, in particular to the Gulf. And we saw very quick results with the UAE and with Saudi Arabia in particular. With Oman, his relations have always been quite comfortable, as also with Bahrain. Kuwait, I think there was issues about treatment of members of the Indian workers community. There were issues of the transition happening in Kuwait itself. So we didn't quite make the breakthrough that we had in other places. Qatar was more substantive. We actually felt that Qatar every now and then plays the Islamic card and uses platforms like Al Jazeera, particularly Al Jazeera Arabic, and some of the new media outlets as well, to kind of raise the Kashmir issue provocatively, to keep flogging the issue of the treatment of Muslims in India and all of that. So we were observing that these were not very friendly actions from our point of view, and that's why. And that wasn't just India specific in some ways. If you recall, back in 2018, I think Qatar was for a while ostracized from the Gulf community. You had this you had this quad of Saudi Arabia, UAE, Bahrain, and Egypt, virtually saying that we will not talk to Qatar. They pulled away their ambassadors and all of that. And again, the reason was in their perception that Qatar was playing host to some of the less desirable Islamist groups. It was giving a platform to firebrand preachers like Yusuf Qaradawi and others on Al Jazeera. And these countries themselves had really taken a position of opposing radicalization within their countries and beyond. So there was a real conflict. And I think we also, in a sense, were at the receiving end of some of Qatar's policies at that point of time.
Mm-hmm. Do you think the visit of the Qatari Emir has closed the door on that controversy involving Indian naval officers?
To a certain extent, because if we go back to the meeting between Prime Minister Modi and the Emir of Qatar on the sidelines of COP28 in Dubai about a year and a bit ago, I think that's where Prime Minister reportedly made a personal pitch for the release of the naval officers, and 8 of the 9 were released and sent back to India. The case about the 9th is still sub judice, so that's still going on. But yes, I would say that to the extent that there was a lot of angst in India about the manner in which these naval officers had been arrested, their release certainly took a major irritant out of the way and perhaps paved the way for this very successful visit of the Emir that we saw earlier this week.
Does that suggest a kind of toning down of the use of various media to highlight issues on there are domestic matters in India, Kashmir, for instance?
I hope that this will be an outcome. I think it's too early to pronounce on that, but I think Qatar today is far more aware of the sensitivity of these positions beyond its own domain. You know, countries like Egypt have conveyed to Qatar in very specific terms. So has Saudi Arabia, so has UAE. That look, you have Al Jazeera as a huge platform, but you can't
True.
use it in ways that destabilizes other countries and creates or rakes up some of the more extreme elements. So I'm hoping that Qatar is today more mindful of other countries' sensitivities, including those of India, on this particular matter.
So, what explains this constant needling of its neighbors, including, of course, India? Is it a desire to punch above its weight, to be taken seriously? What is it?
But I think during the previous Amir's time, Qatar carved out a position for itself, which was unusual for a monarchy, that it was siding with the democratic forces, supposedly post the Arab Spring. If you remember,
Yeah.
back in 2011, 2012, Qatar was solidly supporting the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt. And that became a bone of contention in terms of its relationship with Saudi Arabia and with the UAE. So there were these proxy battles being fought between Qatar on one side. You saw it in Libya, you saw a bit of it in Syria, you certainly saw it in Egypt, and the Saudis and the Emiratis on the other side. And I think there was a recognition by 2022 or so that these were very unproductive areas to start these intra-regional disputes. And so
Mhm.
post 22, post the Al Ula summit in Saudi Arabia, you've actually seen a diffusion of these tensions. You've seen that there's a conscious effort by each of these countries which punches, the UAE punches above its weight, Qatar certainly punches above its weight. You've seen an effort to try and bury the hatchet and work together towards resolving some of the endemic disputes that you see in the region.
Mhm. Let's come to the Qatari Emir's visit. It would seem the big fat takeaway is the commitment to $10 billion investment in India. Now, that is an intention. We are yet to see if the money will come. What's your sense? I mean, given that previous commitments by other Gulf countries in terms of big investments in India don't appear to have really taken off.
Surya, I think that begs a further question, really. Remember, it's an investment. It's
Yeah.
not a grant, it's not a loan, it's not a deposit in our central bank or somewhere else. Investment needs fungible projects
Yeah.
which can be invested into. Now, Qatar Investment Authority, which is one of the largest sovereign funds in the world, I think ranks number 8 in the world or something, has actually invested into Reliance, into Adani, into Swiggy, into a bunch of other entities in India. Uh,
Mhm.
I guess now that they've announced that they will also open an office in India, means they'll have boots on the ground to evaluate opportunities. But remember, even though it's a sovereign wealth fund, there are hard-boiled investment professionals who evaluate each and every investment proposal, weigh it against other opportunities that are available to them in other geographies. So I think the extent to which how quickly this $10 billion actually moves into projects will also be a function of the Indian economy's ability to present projects that are profitable enough for these countries, because they certainly look at a significant dollar rate of return. And so unless your projects are profitable and the environment is conducive, uh, the intent of 10 billion doesn't get translated. We saw it with the $75 billion from UAE, right?
Yeah.
We've seen investments come into a bunch of different areas, but certainly not all of the 75 billion, and it remains work in progress. There's a lot that can be done. But remember, again, it's up to the private sector to be able to attract that investment into substantive, tangible, profitable projects.
So the onus really is on us.
Yes, I think it is. It's a function of our attractiveness as an investment destination, the stability of our policy framework, the long-term profitability of projects. And I can give you an example. I mean, I know that UAE, for example, was very keen to invest into certain projects in the in the renewable energy sector, in solar energy, in Andhra and in Telangana. And then you had changes in government, and the changes in government meant that the new government basically ripped up the old power purchase agreements. Now, if you're going to invest in infrastructure, which has a 30-year payback period or time horizon, these are long gestation projects, and return comes to you over a period of time. If you don't have policy stability, then it becomes a disincentive to the investor, and they look at that framework.
Mm-hmm. Okay. The strategic partnership we have signed with Qatar, generally, in my understanding, when you agree on a strategic partnership, it means you're going to work on a couple of big projects. Do we have anything out there on the horizon?
I think strategic also means that you're taking a longer term view rather than a short term year to year view. And I think, in a sense, we already did one strategic element even before the visit took place, when we signed a long term LNG supply agreement with Qatar. From 2028 to 2048, over a 20-year period, we'll buy 7.5 million tons of LNG per year from Qatar. And that's critical for our economy. Qatar supplies almost 40% of our LNG requirements, which feed everything from power to your cooking gas at homes. So that's vital. I think there are other areas where you can see that longer term intent. For example, the announcement that we're going to start talking about a free trade agreement, begin earnest discussions on a free trade agreement. The signal that we will integrate our UPI payments mechanism with their banking system. The intent that we want to double bilateral trade between our countries from the current level of about $14 billion to about $28 billion in the next 5 years. I think all of these are tangible elements to show that we want a long-term, stable, growing relationship with Qatar.
Mm-hmm. Do we have a kind of, I presume the strategic understanding opens the door to a kind of military relationship, intelligence, exchange of intelligence, counterterrorism, perhaps?
I think the agencies do talk to each other, but on the defense side, I haven't seen very much happen as of now. I think this is something that will take a bit more confidence building before it can move forward in a significant way. I mean, Qatar is home to a major US Air Force base. We know that it's very critical in the American scheme of things for that region. And you might see conversations happen as we go forward. But I would say that when you look at that region broadly and you see where we are with Saudi Arabia and UAE in terms of our defense and intelligence cooperation, Qatar will probably move up. But I think the visit of the Emir yesterday, and particularly Prime Minister Modi's gesture of going to the airport to receive him, which is a departure from usual protocol, it's a very important signal, because in these countries where you have monarchies and leaders are around for longish periods of time with long institutional memories, a personal relationship, a personal gesture really adds to whatever diplomats like us may achieve on the field. So while our ambassador in Qatar has done a wonderful job in preparing for the visit and all of that, I think the gesture of Prime Minister going that extra mile to convey that you are a special friend for me.
Mm-hmm. Tell me, so these kind of gestures, do they actually come from the MEA? Is it something that the PMO itself thinks through? I mean, is there any way to figure out how these things happen?
Yeah, typically MEA gives the inputs. Now,
Okay.
having been an ambassador, every ambassador would want that the country in which he or she serves gets a special treatment,
Yeah.
gets that recognition, gets that extra boost from the prime minister, from the president, whatever. To that extent, all ambassadors suffer from a bit of localitis. That the country in which they are posted becomes the most important, which is as it should be
Yeah,
probably.
yeah,
But
absolutely,
then,
absolutely.
then the Ministry of External Affairs evaluates the ambassador's recommendations, discusses them with the Prime Minister's office, and a certain consensus emerges on how far do you want to go and whether you are then creating expectations in other countries of similar treatment. And that's always
Absolutely,
something
yeah.
that needs to be managed.
Yeah. Another point that struck me, the how do the Qataris see us? I mean, there is an old relationship here with India. The entire region, in fact, has. And where would you say India figures in that Qatari thinking mindset?
Surya, for all of the Gulf, but particularly for UAE, Bahrain, Kuwait, Qatar, uh, even Oman to a certain extent, it's worth remembering that from 1829, when the British signed a maritime agreement with what was called the Trucial States,
Mhm.
um, till virtually till 1967, the legal tender in these countries was the Indian rupee. They were run out of Bombay until 1947. It was the governor in Bombay to whom the British political agents in Bahrain or in Doha or in even in Bushehr in
Yeah.
Iran reported. So during the colonial period, even though these countries were not directly colonized, the fact that they were run out of the British from India, from Bombay in particular, meant that right until their own independence around 1970 or thereabouts, the one big city that they knew was Bombay. The one big country that they knew was India.
Mm.
For trade, for education, for healthcare, for everything. And particularly if you go back some point in time before oil came on the scene, which is roughly the 1950s or so in Qatar, until 1950s, the principal commodity was the pearl trade. Qatar was
Okay.
known, Abu Dhabi was known, Basra was known for its pearls. And the merchants who, often Sindhi merchants who financed the pearl trade, who actually financed the captains of the boats to go out on the sea for 3 months from May, June till September on their pearl diving expedition and then come back, were financed by Indian merchants. It was Indian merchants who bought the pearls. The pearls came to Bombay. It was in Bombay that they were polished and processed before being made into these beautiful necklaces that went around the world. So the relationship between India and Qatar and the other countries in the Gulf is a very old one, a very significant one, and something that I used to hear all the time, that you guys have forgotten us. And perhaps that's to an extent true, that
Yeah.
after 1947, the trauma of the partition meant that we in our heads got more focused on our land borders rather than our maritime links that historically
Yeah.
existed and connected India and the Gulf on one side, India and the ASEAN on the other side. And it's only now that those old links are being revived as part of our look west, act west policy, whatever. And you can see that it means a lot to these countries because India resides in the collective consciousness in these countries as very few other countries do.
Where do you see, stepping back from this visit, the Kuwait visit, and so on? Would you say now that we established a kind of a new benchmark for the Gulf relationship?
Absolutely. I think for too long, particularly since the oil boom of the 1970s in these countries and all of the Indian blue collar workers going there, we tended to see our relationship largely through the prism of the labor. The strategic dimension that we are looking at today, that these countries are sources of capital, they are markets, and they are important for our longer-term maritime security. That dimension that today has come in, I think, means that we are very much back in the reckoning in these countries. It is, I think, unfortunate that we also kind of, again, the fallout or the trauma of the partition, we allowed Pakistan to position itself as the country which was a natural partner for the Muslim countries of the Gulf. And we took almost a back seat for some time. And today, now that we are back in the country, we find that we are being very well received with a lot of warmth.
Ambassador Navdeep, as always, a pleasure talking to you. Thank you very much.
Pleasure, Surya, always.
That's all we have for you on this broadcast. Do subscribe to our YouTube channel. Follow us on social media. Thank you very much. Good day.